Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Our broadcast today brought to you by Nature Box, shipping great-tasting, wholesome snacks right to your door. Forget the vending machine and snack smarter with delicious treats like honey macadamia pretzel pops. Support this show. You get a free Nature Box sampler box at naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. Try them out. naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. Cold morning, at least here in Oklahoma. Now, don't start with me if you live in Alaska. All right? This is cold for us. It's below freezing. You can always tell by looking at the animals. Henry and Rat Dog won't even get out of bed. They're just buried under the blankets, these tiny little eyeballs poking out. So it's getting to be that time of year. So Natalie goes online and she buys them a bunch of doggy clothes. They're just so sweet. Now remember, Rat Dog's about 4 pounds. Henry's about 3.7, I think is what he weighed in at. Very small. And she's looking at stuff with bells and bows and fluff and foop, and isn't it going to be sweet? And now I have 2 dogs coping with the cold temperatures, and when you pick them up in their clothed state, they just look like hand puppets. Those little people with fur all over them. But anyway, we're getting in the mood, right? We're getting in the winter, the fall kind of vibe with the holiday fast approaching. I saw what I will accept, what I will use, what I will promote as my official holiday card of the year. Somebody posted it to my Facebook page, and it's got Jesus on it. So this is perfect for those who say Jesus is the reason for the season. Jesus is the reason for the season. Jesus in this postcard is holding a lightsaber. He's standing next to Santa. Santa looks like a beer bottle in his right hand. Both are perched on top of a velociraptor. In the back, you see spaceships. And then there's a mountain vista behind it. Many people complained that there weren't some other features in the photo like Noah's Ark and whatnot, but it's just awesome. It's just so many fictions combined for one great festive holiday card. I was looking for a place to buy it. I didn't see it. I saw it posted on a ton of different websites. So I guess you just print it and make your own card in Photoshop, something like that. Anyway, Google it. It's just awesome. And it's kind of a fun way to be a skeptic over the holiday without being a total jerk to everybody you're with, right? They post Jesus cards. You get to post a Jesus card, right? Jesus is the reason for the season. Speaking of Facebook, I'm taking a ton of heat right now. Not for anything important, because I'm dissing the latest Walking Dead episode. And no, I'm not going to give any spoilers. We're into season 5. I don't know what episode 5 or 6. God. I'm like a battered partner coming back for more and more of this stuff, right? Oh, there's a great episode. It's going to be wonderful again. And then I watch what I watched 2 days ago, and it was unbelievably bad. So you say something online and everybody circles the wagons. Or they say, you should read the graphic novel, which I probably should. I get the vibe the graphic novel for The Walking Dead, just awesome. And there's potential here. But this has sort of become my daytime soap, except I'm watching, of course, at night. And it's part of the way I'm coping with the fact that Breaking Bad is over. I went back and started Breaking Bad at season 1, episode 1. I'm already into season 3 binge watching. When I get to the end, I'm going to grieve all over again. Did you see that article this week? It was on Yahoo and I think Raw Story and tons of other websites about the woman who is saying that Monster Energy drink is actually promoting the devil. You cannot make this stuff up. She is asserting, and there was phone video of her at some kind of a trade show where she was demonstrating how the M in Monster is actually made up of a Hebrew 6 repeated 3 times. Yes, that's 666, the number of the beast. She also said, take a look at the O in the word monster. Just take a look at that. What's it look like to you? And the guy speaking to her says, I think he says, it's a cross. It's right, it's a cross, representing the Antichrist. So when someone drinks from the can and the can tilts upside down, it is a reverse cross or an upside down cross representing the devil. Bottoms up and the devil laughs, she says. It's something to think about. It's the satanic panic all over again. Now, the folks at Monster have got to be just laughing their asses off and thanking this woman for an unbelievable amount of free publicity. Hell, all major product lines should whip up some kind of Antichrist controversy, right? I'll call my friends up at NatureBox. Hey, look, guys, can you make a pentagram pretzel? Yeah, just put 6 of them in a bag and sell them 3 bags at a time. 666. They'll sell like hotcakes. The devil is in the details. He's everywhere. You're not looking, by the way. Just out of curiosity, I dug around for other logos beyond Monster, right, to find out where 666 is alleged to be hidden in designs. And you would not believe it. There are websites out there and religious organizations claiming that you will find 666 embedded in everything from Walt Disney to Coca-Cola, Google, Starbucks, Time Warner, the American Medical Association, CBS Television, GE, Procter & Gamble, of course. And don't even get them started on that eyeball and pyramid on the back of the dollar bill. One of my favorite examples is the correlation that was made between the Apple logo for Apple computers and the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. And the photograph actually it's an older Apple logo, the multicolored apple. And it shows it right next to Adam and Eve holding up an apple in the garden. I mean, who can see this example and not know it's the devil at work? Examine the logos all around you, people. It reminds me of that John Carpenter film, They Live, starring Roddy Piper. It's actually not a bad movie, where aliens came and embedded secret messages underneath the overt messages that we were seeing on billboards and on television, on the radio, in our newspapers and whatnot. And those messages were obey. What were the messages? Obey, submit, conform, that kind of thing. Be a sheep. Let us do all the thinking. It was actually kind of a relevant, socially relevant show. I can't believe I'm saying that about a John Carpenter film. Coming up next week on the radio show, I'm doing a broadcast about something called the Quiverful movement. This was brought to my attention, I guess last year or the year before. We were talking about this movement among some conservative evangelical Christian couples, mostly in the U.S., but you'll find examples in Canada and in Britain, Australia, other places. And they are all into procreation. Right? They reject all the birth control. They say it's up to God whether or not we will conceive. We are going to have as many children as possible. We will have a quiver full. And it's based on some scripture. We're going to get into it next week. And I've got some people who sort of escaped the quiver full culture and have the inside skinny on exactly what's going on. I'll also have an interview with a reporter in New York who wrote a book on the whole thing. And I'll tell you, the more you hear about what religion does, especially to women and young children, it just makes me livid. That we ever needed a reason to go out and just fight, and just swing the big stick as hard as we can and try to try to beat this nonsense back. This is a great example. So we're going to talk about that next week. Today, we're talking about the tipping point, things that tipped you over the edge, things that pushed you to the point where you said, I can't take it anymore. You finally turned the corner, legitimately turned the corner and said, I no longer buy any of this stuff. And we have your phone calls and emails straight away. First, do me a favor, even if you have never tried NatureBox ever before, ever, take 2 minutes and type this into your web browser. Go to naturebox.com/thinkingatheist and just look at it, all right? Looking around hundreds of healthy snack options that they have, and you can just ask yourself, is this a better option than what I'm doing now for snacks, right? If your snacks now are just sugar and fat, I encourage you to give NatureBox a try because their stuff is really good. And I'm not just saying this because they're a sponsor. I wouldn't have them on the radio if I didn't believe in what they were about. If you try it and you like it, it's a great way to support the show. Now's a great time to try it because NatureBox is offering a free trial, free snacks, a free sampler box featuring 5 of their most popular snacks. Or if you sign up with NatureBox, you can just fill your online pantry with whatever you want. Stuff like toasted sesame sticks, cherry vanilla granola, salted caramel pretzel pops, pumpkin, cranberry crave. Just log on, look around. It's a great site. It's a great idea for those of us who want a snack option with no artificial flavors, colors, or sweeteners, 0 grams trans fats, no high fructose corn syrup, and healthy stuff that doesn't taste like peanut-flavored styrofoam. Free shipping anywhere in the U.S. A free sampler trial awaits you. Go to naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. And thank you so much for supporting the show. I had an email in from Derek. It's a rather long one, but it's a great story. And he starts off the show by saying this. I love the idea of discussing the tipping point of when a person finally loses their religious belief and embraces atheism. I hope this episode gives listeners a better understanding of what factors really impact our core beliefs. As for myself, I'm a 25-year-old atheist who was raised in the Catholic tradition here in the United States. I actually remember my tipping point quite well. I was a 17-year-old and teaching my 6th grade Sunday school class when it happened. Before I go into the specifics of that day, though, I wanted to say a few things regarding the nature of my religious belief. I think I speak for most of us when I say that it's a mistake to refer to belief as though it were a single belief held in our mind. The reality is that when we talk about our belief in God or Jesus, what we're actually referring to is a complex web of beliefs, plural, which are all interconnected in our mind. The belief that, say, Jesus is the Son of God does not exist in a vacuum. There are, by necessity, many other beliefs which must exist to support that one end belief. Call them supporting beliefs. For example, one must at the very least believe in the reliability of either Scripture or the claims of their church leaders before they can believe in the divinity of Christ. Therefore, before we can reach our tipping point, we must first lose or at least dislodge quite a few of these supporting beliefs. As a child and young adult, I always cared about exactly what I believed. Ironically, this probably had something to do with the fact that I was so religious. I always wanted to be strong in my faith. That meant examining the particulars of my religious beliefs to make sure they squared with my non-religious beliefs about the world. They often didn't. Thinking back, it was a type of war in my mind, where my religious beliefs were on one side and any contradictory scientific beliefs were on the other. For years, my religious beliefs were losing this war. The problem was that every time a religious belief came up against science or reason, it lost. In every instance, the scientific explanations had better arguments, whether it was the book of Genesis versus the work of Darwin, or the story of Noah's Ark versus common sense. Religion simply lost every time. The religious beliefs were just so unsupportable that they never even put up much of a fight. But every time my religious beliefs lost a battle, I didn't fret over it. There was never too much internal conflict going on. I think it was because I thought I could surrender one belief after another without jeopardizing my identity as a Christian. But what I didn't realize was that every time I let go of a particular religious belief, I really lost one more supporting belief that had been giving cover to the linchpin of my identity, my belief in the God of the Bible. I attribute my ability to see the Bible for what it is to my parents. Luckily, from a young age, they never sought to shield me from mainstream science. Even though they were very religious, to their credit, they never tried to discredit the beauty and power of scientific discovery. To the contrary, in fact, they wouldn't just take my young brother and me to church on Sunday, but they also brought us to the Yale Peabody Museum in New Haven. It was there looking at the woolly mammoth and the massive skeleton of the then-named Brontosaurus that we got our underlying sense of wonder and curiosity for the natural world. Understanding science, history, and psychology, no one religious story really ever stood a chance. One belief after another, science and reason would effortlessly remove or replace things I once held to be true. If my religious identity as a Christian could be described as a marionette suspended by various strings of belief, then one after another those strings were being cut away. Even though I was letting go of religious belief after religious belief, I still considered myself a Christian. But my identity as a Christian was shrinking every day. Almost all atheists agree the change in our identity from Christian to atheist does not happen overnight. It is at minimum a process. Countless variables, nuances, and particulars make it a slow, long slog out of the weeds. We have a lot of strings to be cut before that identity finally falls away. How can we ever pinpoint just one moment where we drop our religious beliefs entirely? How can we ever identify our own tipping point? Well, for many of us, I think there is clearly a time when we first realize and acknowledge to ourselves our own lack of belief. And I think this moment really can be very precise. Even though there's this vast tangle of belief strings that supports our identity, eventually there will just be one. And then that one string is all that is there to keep the whole thing up and swinging. If any strings broke in the past, it was easy to ignore. But when the spring that breaks is the last one holding up your identity, you notice. For me, this moment came one morning while I was teaching my Sunday school class. I remember we were discussing Jesus' resurrection. The students, who were clearly too young to know which questions we Christians aren't supposed to ask, were full of inappropriate questions. Did my grandfather go to hell because he didn't go to church? Will I get to see my dog in heaven? Why does God send some people to hell just for not believing in him? Why is that considered a bad thing, etc., etc.? I dodged and weaved as best I could, giving the students what I thought was the most appropriate answers. Finally, one of my most enthusiastic students, a bright boy who always sat in the front row, asked me an honest, simple question about the nature of salvation. Now, there is no good answer to this question. The question of salvation is always heavily debated among theologians. The truth is, there can never be a right answer because even if you do hold Christian beliefs, the source material, the Bible, is at best highly contradictory. Therefore, any answer to this question is necessarily someone's subjective opinion. But this boy was smart. He didn't want to hear my opinion. He was asking me what God really thinks, and consequently how things actually worked. He didn't understand the Bible himself, but he did trust me as his teacher. The teacher his parents had sent him to, the teacher who he had no reason to question and every reason to trust as a credible authority. This is when my last string snapped. If I had a precise tipping point, that was it. Thinking back now, I realize just how thin that thread was. By the time all of my formal beliefs about Christianity had already fallen away, all that remained was the abstract notion of a historical figure named Jesus who was the Son of God. And that slippery belief was finally tied down, brought to the forefront of my mind, and put on trial. When I couldn't find any of the supporting beliefs that had existed in the past, it was unavoidably clear to me I really didn't believe that any of the Bible was written by God, and I really didn't believe that someone named Jesus was God. It was that simple. I was at once forced to acknowledge that I no longer believed in the Christian God. There was a lot that led up to the realization that day, but it was my failing to answer this student's question that actually broke through and allowed me to admit to myself that my doubts were not merely doubts. I remember considering that whatever I said could easily have a huge impact on these children's lives and the decisions they made. I was in a position of tremendous power that I could have easily abused, that I was tempted to abuse. I was the authority, but I was just making things up. I had to make things up. I couldn't do the intellectually honest thing and just say, I don't know. Suddenly, the whole charade came into crystal focus. It was painfully obvious why church leaders always spoke with more authority than any honest person should. What choice did they have? The entire Christian narrative simply didn't allow for uncertainty. The whole practice falls apart if its authorities admit uncertainty. And so the entire farce continues awkwardly on and on and on, without any sort of corrective mechanism. Our churches suffocate curiosity and genuine inquiry. By closing itself off from these values, the church unfortunately succeeds in preserving its static and unchanging dogmas. When one of my students asked a question I didn't know the answer, I was given the chance to perpetuate that dogmatic condition. I looked at his face. He was so eager to learn, so eager to know the truth. The easy thing for me to do would have been to make something up. Instead, because I couldn't, in good conscience, lie to this child, I was forced into surrendering my Christian identity over to reason. I don't remember exactly what I told my student that day, but I didn't just pull an answer out of my ass. I admitted I didn't know, and I moved on. I finished out the rest of that year as gracefully as possible, and I was glad when it was all over. Derek, thank you so much for sharing your story about your own tipping point. Area code 315, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
This is Ben from Glens Falls, New York.
Glad you called, Ben. How you doing, my friend?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you for your great show. I've been listening for years.
Well, thank you for calling. Today we're talking about tipping points. You have a story for us?
Well, yes, I did. I actually had two tipping points of my own, one that kind of jump-started my doubt and skepticism, and one that closed the door on religion altogether. The first was actually, I was, it's ironic, the letter you just read, I was in a Sunday school class when I had my first moment of real doubt. One of the teachers there was giving us a lesson on prayer, and she explained that we pray with our palms pressed together and our fingers pointing straight up. We don't clasp our hands. We don't lace our fingers together, because when you put your palms together and point your fingers straight up, the devil can't sit on your hands. And it was just like, when you're a little kid, how at a certain age anything an adult says is just the truth.
Yeah.
Then one day you realize that, okay, yeah, adults can be full of crap. Adults can lie. That was like the first time I can remember hearing an adult saying something and thinking to myself, this person is full of crap. And the second was the one that just pushed me over the cliff and made me leave religion behind entirely, was when I was in college. And by high school, I was kind of just going through the motions, going to church kind of because it was expected of me. But when I went out to college, I started meeting people of other faiths and of no faith, and talking to people about it in a serious fashion in an environment that wasn't built to constantly reinforce what you already believe. And the beliefs kind of started to peel away like the layers of an onion, and finally I was just to the level of like, okay, I'm a deist. I believe there's something out there, but I don't know what. And then I was by myself in my dorm room reading a book, and it wasn't like a philosophy book or anything like that. It was just I think it was a science fiction novel, and there was a character who just had this little one-page monologue where they were talking about the nature of reality and faith versus reason. And he starts talking about how faith is no good as evidence because anybody can use faith to support any belief, even, when two people invoke faith to support two mutually exclusive beliefs. They both can't be right, but they can use faith with equal veracity. And so I kind of read that, and I sat up and I said, huh. And at that moment, I was an atheist, and I've been one ever since.
Is it Skeptic, where you can download the baloney detection kit? It just seems like you sort of had an internal baloney detection kit, right?
I thank my father for that. My dad is one of the most practical, natural BS detectors I have ever met in my life. And whenever I get that sense of something's a little off here, I give him a call. And he has never steered me wrong. He can smell a scam 100 miles away. And he was never really all that religious. It was kind of my mother who was the religious one in the family and kept all of us going. But, I kind of think of my dad as sort of one of those apatheist type people. And it's like, I don't really care.
Yeah.
But that day in Sunday school when she said, we pray with our fingers pointing straight up so the devil can't sit on our hands, that flicked on my skepticism switch, and I haven't been able to shut it off since.
It reminds me, from time to time, I'll go back and listen to some interviews and presentations that Christopher Hitchens. I just miss Hitch. He was instrumental in my own escape from religion, and there's something about sort of the tempo of his voice that I just enjoy. And I was listening again to an interview he did on C-SPAN. I think this was back in 2007. Where he was talking about the time that he was in. It was, I think, a Catholic school or a Catholic Sunday school. And the teacher, who he really admired and adored and thought was wonderful, said something to the effect of, all the plants and trees are green because God knew that this would be the most pleasing color to the human eye. And at his very young age, he immediately thought, this is bullshit. And that was about all he needed, man. He was out.
I'm glad you brought up Hitch, because Hitch, to me, was kind of like the Harvey Milk of atheism. Because, Harvey Milk, the great gay rights leader, told all the gay people, come out, be who you are, don't be in the closet, don't be ashamed. And for some time after I became an atheist, I was very hesitant about talking to anybody about it, and Hitch was the person who convinced me that, I don't have anything to be ashamed about. I don't owe anyone any explanations, and so I'm glad you brought up Hitch, because I love him too.
Thanks, Ben, for the call, and thanks for listening, my friend. Take care of yourself.
You take care too.
All right. See you later.
Bye-bye.
I'm probably guilty of bringing him up so much, but there's something about Hitch's style that just resonated with me. His fearlessness, his wit, his encyclopedic brain. I'm not saying he was perfect. He was far from perfect. Warts and all, though, the guy made a monumental difference in my life. And like Ben said, he emboldened me. Hearing him speak so fearlessly actually gave me courage. What am I apologizing for? Everybody else is believing in magic. I'm just the one saying, prove it. And that gave me courage, and he was a tremendous influence on me. Heather sent a message and said, when I was a child, people would ask me where I go to church. And I would answer, the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, not Mormon. My father was a volunteer preacher, but even after he died, my mother made my sister and I go to services every Sunday. I now realize I'm not alone by a long shot. When I started questioning the church in my pre-teen years, I had issues with the Joseph Smith story. Why the golden plates weren't still around. Why only the Utah Mormons practiced polygamy back in the day. Didn't Joseph Smith get that revelation from God, etc.? I'm going to come back to that, Heather. Hang on. There was also an incident during a service about heaven where I asked if we would be wearing clothes. Sounds childlike, but I was truly curious about the physical nature of heaven. The pastor laughed at me, as did everyone else, and made a joke about us having wings and flying so fast no one would be able to see our naked bodies or something like that. I was embarrassed and learned not to ask questions because these folks either didn't know the answer or would make fun of you for asking. So I gave up a bit. I figured that Joseph Smith's story was dishonest, although it took about 20 more years and the internet for me to realize it to be an outright fraud. Even at that young age, a thought came to me: if one man could come up with a story that grew to a powerful institution in just under 200 years, what could one man create in 2000? And the house of cards fell. And I didn't really believe in Jesus anymore. Maybe he was just a man or a story that grew out of control. I wasn't sure about God for a long time until I had a religious relapse. I'm married to a Christian man. He goes to church sometimes and he says he believes. Life was getting stressful and I thought, well, maybe I'd just been going to the wrong church growing up and needed something new. So I attended a large non-denominational church and enjoyed going for about 6 months. Then came Easter, and the pastor gave a great sermon. That was my tipping point. He was very sincere and honest. He said very plainly that if you do not believe in the resurrection of Jesus, you are not a Christian. And that was it. I was finally able to admit I wasn't a Christian, never had been. And if I didn't believe in Jesus, why would I believe in any other supernatural beings? I do not. I'm an atheist. I feel so much better now. Heather, thanks for sharing your story. You know, the article just released, was it yesterday, on the Mormon Church and Joseph Smith? I'll just read a paragraph on CNN's website. The founder of the Mormon Church, Joseph Smith, wed as many as 40 wives, including some who were already married, and one as young as 14 years old, the church acknowledged in a surprising new essay. Smith's marital history had been the subject of frequent historical debate, but until recently, Mormon leaders had taken pains to present its founding prophet as happily married to one woman. Now the church says careful estimates put the number between 30 and 40. What was the rationalization? I think it's a little further down. According to the church's essay, Smith had not wanted to take multiple wives, but relented after an angel appeared to him 3 times between 1834 and 1842. On the angel's last visit, the church said, quote, the angel came with a drawn sword, threatening Joseph with destruction unless he went forward and obeyed the commandment fully. Unquote. Now, this is common. It's common especially with the Mormon Church. You've got a nasty piece of history, an inconvenient, if nothing else, an inconvenient piece of history, and you obfuscate or you deny or you kind of hem and haw until finally there's nothing else to be done. The information's everywhere. You're going to have to address it. Okay, let's release an essay. You know? No, he didn't have one wife. He had 40. 40 at the same time? Doesn't say, but I'm curious. Area code 480, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
This is Josh Graninetti in Arizona.
Josh, thanks for calling, my friend. We're talking about tipping points today. What do you have for us?
Yeah, I sent you an email about mine and my little sister converting to Mormonism, raising questions as I watch my family members and friends kind of draw odd lines between the Mormon religion and non-denominational Christian. And you responded to that email, which kind of prompted me to give you a call and kind of add a little bit to that story.
Well, give the audience a primer real fast on what you and I are talking about, would you?
Well, yeah, like I said, I live in Arizona, and speaking of weather, we get beat up here in Arizona for 4 months of the year, but the rest of the year is paradise. So it's 70 degrees out here, and, the Mormons, they pretty much dominate Gilbert, Arizona, which is where I'm from. And my little sister started dating a young man who is a Mormon individual, and he obviously couldn't really date her until she converted to Mormonism, which she did. And when that happened, I watched my parents just absolutely judge her and hate her almost. And, I found myself doing the same thing, and everyone around associated with her doing the same thing. And I began to wonder, what sort of evidence do I have that she isn't right? I mean, maybe she is, and I began to respect her even because she has done what less than 6% of the people are able to do in this planet, and that is to change the faith that they were brought up in to something different in their later age. There's only 6% of the people in the world that are able to accomplish that feat. So although I didn't agree with her, I had to respect her ability to do that. So I began to question my own. Not to become an atheist, but to validate my own beliefs to myself and to my son when he started asking questions. It just so happened that turned me the opposite direction,
Once you start asking those inconvenient questions, look what happens to you.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, though, because I was asking questions for a long time, but the answer was always, quote, because God, da-da-da-da-da. But I had to find myself in a position that I was willing to not just allow that to be the answer. And when I did that, certain things started to bother me. One thing I remember specifically was a friend. We had somebody pass away in our circle, and the only question my friends were able to ask was, were they a believer? And I just found that so offensive. Every thought, feeling, emotion, struggle, triumph, victory, failure that person had ever experienced was summed up in one question to a Christian. And that really didn't sit well with me,
Yeah.
Certain things like that began to bother me. I found God to be more selfish than loving. One of the things Christians would constantly tell me is God loves you, he wants a relationship with you, all these things, but he's willing to go through this creation and this horrific plan for, quote, man's salvation just to be worshipped. His ultimate goal was to be glorified based on mankind, and it just seemed like a more selfish God than a loving God, and that didn't sit well with me either. And finally, I think the biggest thing for me was just, if the Bible was God's one way to communicate with us, why wouldn't it be more clear? Why would it be so convoluted with confusion if that was his one and only way to communicate with us, his plan of salvation, his way to find us in this confusing world that he allows, the deceiver to go around and deceive us all? I just found it all very, very struggling. Anyway, my tipping point, Seth, came when I was sitting outside drinking some coffee, looking up at the stars and just praying and doing the whole thing and just begging God to show me something. Show me, I am being deceived here by Satan. I am on the precipice of not sure what I believe, God. I need you. And just I sat out there for 2 hours and just nothing happened. I would have taken anything. I was looking for anything. I was in that position where I was looking for my prayer to be answered, and I just got nothing. And it woke me up to, I would never, if my wife, if my son ever needed me in the way I needed, quote, God then, I would never not be there for them. So that was kind of my tipping point.
What was the phrase that I've heard floated around quite a bit? The absence of evidence is actually evidence of absence, right? The fact that it at least demonstrates that there's no benevolent God, no caring God. Quite possibly, if there was a deity, it would be a very sadistic, sort of mischievous, cruel deity out there. And
if I could just take up another minute or two.
Go ahead.
About 2 weeks into my atheism, I looked at my wife and I said, I want to remarry you all over again. And she looked at me and said, why? I said, you know as well as I do this journey I've been on, and you know that I'm an atheist. And I told her, what better gift can I give to you as an atheist now to say that I only get 80 years. I'm 25 years old now. I only get 80 years. And my existence on this planet, when it's over, and I look back on it, would not have been as important or as completing to me if I didn't share that with you, as opposed to a religious standpoint where it's like, we're in the pit stop. This is you're gonna do for now, kind of an attitude that you really don't I don't really think that's aware to most religious people, but once I moved to atheism and I looked at my wife, how much more important is she now to know that every thought, feeling, emotion, experience I'm ever going to have is going to be shared with that one person. And it's a much better lifestyle. It's a much better way of going about seeing things. And
what was her reaction when you said these words?
you know, I'm very personal with my wife, and
I mean, don't share anything that's too. I don't want to pry into your windows, man. But I'm just thinking, what an amazing thing to say to your life partner. You know, I mean, I got goosebumps when you were telling me the story. So what happened?
Well, you know, I mean, she sat up behind the kitchen counter. I think it took a minute or two to absorb. But, you know, I'm definitely not shy about being very verbal with my wife about how I feel for her. And when I said that, though, I think she really, there are certain times in a marriage, I think, and we've only been married 4 years, but there are certain times when you kind of become business partners more than, you know, friends and lovers. And I think we've kind of been in the, she's pregnant again. We have a 2-year-old, so we're kind of in the middle of a bunch. But anyway, when I said that, she basically came over and kissed me and told me how much she loves me too, and
awesome.
So we just shared that moment, and that was it. You know, I think she's probably dwelled on it more and more.
That story just made my show. I mean, that is really, really something. Did you say that your wife was a believer, a non-believer? She ambivalent?
She's always been kind of an agnostic. She could take it or leave it. You know.
So when you said those words sort of under the context of atheism, she didn't take affront to it. She wasn't offended by it. She saw it as a gesture. Okay, all right.
You know, because we've been going to church for 3 years prior to this, and, you know, she was going to church primarily because she liked the messages, but not really, she never really bought into any of it, you know what I'm saying? And so when I decided I was an atheist, it was really easy for her to say, yeah, that makes more sense to me than anything. One final thing. I want to ask you if maybe you look into doing something for your listeners. I would love to get a wristband of your show, you know, one of those silicone wristbands, maybe black in color, that just kind of has a thinking atheist symbol on it twice on opposing ends, just to wear around and maybe be a conversation piece, maybe kind of be, you know, support the show. I think that'd be a really neat thing to maybe look into to make it for your listeners.
Okay, I want everyone to know that I did not stage this call. Josh is not a plant. I did not ask him to bring this up. But Josh, I will answer your question, okay? Here's the short answer is that my current store setup right now, my fulfillment house really only does apparel. And by apparel, I mean T-shirts and long sleeve shirts and I think hoodies.
I see.
And I'm coming to the point where that's really a problem. I mean, they've been amazing to me, but the only way I can provide the Thinking Atheist mug, we have a great black mug and it just says Start Thinking on one side and it has the Thinking Atheist icon on the other. So there's the word atheist is nowhere on there, but it's a great mug and it's a great conversation piece. It's too expensive to fulfill those online. I mean, just paying the storage cost, I lose money. So I can only have them made and then take them on the road with me when I do tour stops.
I see.
I have wristbands. It's a great black band. It's got the TTA icon on each side and it says Start Thinking on inside and out. It's meant to be a conversation.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
And, you know, honestly, if you'll shoot me an email, I'll mail you some. Okay. But I'm working now on some options to change the store, potentially change my fulfillment house so that we can do the stickers and the wristbands and the mugs and all the things that people have been asking for. I'm so flattered they've asked, but I just haven't. And plus my attention's been focused elsewhere. I am this close to finishing my second book. I can see the end zone, Josh. I'm probably submitting to the publisher for the first run of copy edits in the first week of December. I'm waiting on some illustrations and sort of going through. So I'm overwhelmed with stuff. But as soon as I get over this hump, I will work on it. And by the first quarter of 2015, I'm hoping to have tons more options for you. Okay?
Right on. Yeah, I'll send you that email. And thanks for everything, Seth. It means a lot what you do. I know you're told it all the time, but it really, really helped me.
Oh, it never gets old. No, so thanks, brother. You take care of yourself, all right?
You too, Seth.
All right. Had another gentleman named Derek send a message who said this. He said, I met my best friend in church. We've been doubting our faith for about a year. And since we were forced by our parents to attend, we usually sat in my friend's car smoking cigarettes and reading Pierce Anthony books. One time we decided to give it one more chance. So we went in, and the youth pastors were asking the youth group to give money to build a new section of the church. It went around from sixth grader to seniors. When they tallied the number, it was $1,500. They were angry and said we could all give more, calling out different high schoolers, telling them they could hold off on a new car for a year. We were outraged. My best friend and I stood up, flipped him the bird, and walked out, never to come back. That's what Christianity is. People who shake down kids for tooth fairy money. Daniel said this, I read Genesis and laughed, then got disgusted, then laughed some more. The end. Jim said that none in second grade was the reason I had a tipping point. That nun in second grade slapped the shit out of me in front of the entire class. After a story about Jesus, she took questions. I wanted to know if she had hair under her habit. I was 8 years old. It went from a story about a man God with great love to mayhem in the blink of an eye. Man, those nuns screw you up. I've had a lot of people mention stories like that. Had an email from Natalie. And no, this is not my Natalie, by the way. Natalie said this, since this week's topic is what event led to deconversion, I thought I'd share my story. When I was 10, I spoke to Jesus. I was in the cathedral praying, smelling the incense, when I saw Jesus before me as clear as any other person. He was looking at me with unbounded benevolence and kindness. He told me to be brave and strong because he was looking out for me. He told me everything would be okay because he was there. In 1999, my family moved from New York City to Tennessee, and I began attending a private religious school where we had morning gatherings in the chapel and weekly services at least once per week. It's important to note that I was a Catholic and this was an Episcopal school. The two religions are close enough that my parents and family felt no conflict in this. The first big hit came in 8th grade when we took a religious studies course. We learned about the 5 pillars of Islam, the Buddhist threefold path, the concepts of karma and dharma. The blow came when I asked my teacher why our religion was more valid than these others. Why was Christianity different? The man could give no answer. In a religious school with a religious teacher in a class of students who all shared almost identical theology, he could give no answer. He gave one of the weak apologist answers that essentially punted to "it just is." When I pressed further, he changed the subject. In high school, I spent some time exploring these other faiths, but eventually settled back into Catholicism. My family had been Catholic for 1,000 years. It must have some merit. I began studying Latin, and a large part of that was church history. When I went to college for the first time, I studied classics, Latin, and the early church in anthropology. It was at this point when the final blow came. Through my studies, I found out the truth about the construction of the Gospels and the political and cultural landscape that the cult of Christianity was born into. I'd known that the Bible was not literally true for a while. Catholics don't really care about that. But to find out that the canon had been voted on was devastating. Truth is not determined by vote. What I'd been taught as doctrine had been decided by popular vote. Most damning of all, I found out that Jesus was not special. I found documents of several prophets that had been in the area at the time. My whole faith rested on the divine inspiration of Jesus. If he was simply one of many who were saying similar things at this time, why was his message correct? Why was this the correct religion? When asking again, like before, I could get no good answer. More and more, it looked like this was simply the cult that got lucky. I dropped out of college. When I was 20, I sat down and told myself I had to be honest. I looked at the Nicene Creed. What I'd always been told was the definition of what it was to be Christian. I looked at each point and was honest. Did I believe in the divinity of Jesus? No. Did I believe in the God of the Bible? No. Did I believe in the Holy Spirit? No. I could not call myself a Catholic, and so I put it aside and accepted by that definition I was an atheist. I'm 27 now. I found myself more happy and balanced since I resolved this. I have returned to school and am working toward a bachelor's of science. Good for you, Natalie. I found comfort in finding this podcast. It's good to know that I'm not alone and I'm not crazy. Thank you so much for the message. I've got a Skype call. Hi, you're on the Thinking Atheist Radio podcast. Who's this?
This is Jan Helge from Norway.
So glad you've called the show. We're talking about people's tipping points today. What's your perspective?
Well, I had actually a couple of tipping points. The first one was from Christianity when I was 9 or 10. I can remember we were on vacation up north. I grew up in the south of Norway in the so-called Bible Belt of Norway. But my family raised me mostly to be a free thinker, but they still raised me Christian. I still went to Sunday school and I still went to church once in a while, and I got confirmed. But when I was 9 or 10, I remember my grandma died. And my dad came in and told us about it, and he said, she's with Jesus now. And I didn't understand why Jesus wanted my grandma. So that was the first tipping point away from Christianity. After that, I didn't really believe in the Christian God. I was sort of a deist, but I kept wandering around, just looking for something to believe in. But I searched out through Buddhism, and even went back to my Norse roots and studied a lot of Norse beliefs and Norse mythology, but I could never satisfy myself with those answers that were there as well. So when I was about 20, I was in the army, and there was this disaster during an exercise. It was actually a field exercise, a NATO exercise. And the roof collapsed on one of the buildings because of the amount of snow that was on top of it. And several officers and soldiers were inside the building. We had to sit and wait for, I'm sorry, I'm just remembering that night. We had to sit and wait to be called out to help dig up the bodies. And I remember just going through all sorts of ideas and thoughts in my head and realizing that the universe wasn't really out to protect us. So that's when the last bit of deism fell away. And then finally my conspiracy ideas fell away when I started finding Matt Dillahunty's videos online, and also started reading a lot of Michael Shermer, a lot of Hitchens, and also Dawkins and Dennett and Harris as well. So,
did you feel any guilt? Did you have to go through that particular gauntlet? I'm not supposed to be having these thoughts. I shouldn't be doubting. Did you have any of that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, especially when I was a kid. Because I grew up sort of an outsider anyway, so I wasn't really with the in crowd. So for me, it was sort of natural to see things from the outside in. But I still got the odd questions because I was studying Buddhism and also Norse mythology, because a lot of people, especially in the South, they conflate having long black hair and dressing sort of oddly and reading odd books to be, you're a Satanist. You're out to burn churches.
Yeah.
Even though I look like a church burner, I'm not really one to vandalize.
Even though I look like a church burner, I'm really a nice guy, yeah.
There's actually a funny story there, because I walk around, during the winter, I have like a long, dark black coat. And I used to work in the film industry, and we were down checking out some equipment next to a church. And I had to stand outside and wait for somebody with a gas can in my hand, don't ask why, wow. Outside a church with long, dark hair. I got some weird looks.
I'm sure. Speaking of being judged on appearances, one of my dear friends, Aaron Raw, you may be familiar with him. The guy's like, he looks like 9 feet tall when he's dressed up in black, and he's got the big black hat on. He's got the Fu Manchu and the dark eyes, and a very imposing figure the man cuts. And people are quick, especially I think religious people are very quick to judge him. They say he looks devilish or satanic. He looks hard. He looks mean. He looks terrifying. And of course, the laughable part is the moment you speak to the man, you realize that he loves people and he has this rich, wonderful sense of humor, and he's just this big teddy bear. I mean,
it's funny that you should mention Aaron, because I actually just a couple of days ago tweeted about him and me looking pretty much the same, and joking about the fact that he might have been a trip down south in Norway around the early 1980s. So
oh yeah,
it's kind of it was kind of funny that you brought him up. But I love his video. I love his work. He's a brilliant orator and a brilliant educator as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the call, man. Thanks for that. And, I'll send Arn a heads up and tell him to listen to this portion of the show. I know he's crazy busy with his own podcast and speeches and traveling and whatnot, but I'm sure he'll find great encouragement in your words. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being a part of the broadcast, my friend.
Thank you for having me on.
All right. Take care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
I guess his story about the roof collapsing and the dead and injured speaks to the problem of evil, which is often discounted when you talk about it in terms of why you walk away from a belief in a God, any God. And I'm not so quick to discount the problem of evil. I think it might be a really good reason. If nothing else, it's a really good reason to doubt a benevolent, involved deity. I had an email in from John who said this: I was raised a Baptist in the heart of the Bible Belt, was very religious up to my junior and senior year of high school, when I started distancing myself from my faith due to inconsistencies I began to see, as well as the hypocrisy and wrong I saw being done in my home church. As you can imagine, I was still hesitant to completely renounce the Christian God altogether, even though I had serious doubts. Well, I graduated, went to school, and became an EMT, paramedic, in my home country. One day I responded to a terrible call where a little girl lost her life at home in a complete freak accident. We worked on her for well over 45 minutes, but when we got to the hospital, they pronounced her dead. I was the one supplying her lifeless body with oxygen when the order came from the doctor to cease our efforts, and so I gave her her last breath. Needless to say, this call had a serious psychological effect on me and everyone else who was involved. I spent the next week or so barely able to get any sleep, with constant thoughts of the call and wondering why this would happen to an innocent little girl. My coworkers and family were all great about helping me cope with what I'd seen. Everything was just fine until someone said, "Just remember, this was all part of God's plan." Now, this is something that is often said in my neck of the woods, because many people use religion as a crutch to deal with loss and tragedy. This is what sent me over the edge with my faith. Instead of finding comfort in that statement, I found anger and clarity. It finally became obvious that there were two possibilities. Either there is no God, no plan, and everything that happens in life is chance, and there's nothing we can do to explain the tragedies, or worse, there is an all-powerful and all-knowing God who controls everyone's fate, but is cruel enough to rob this girl of her life for no good reason, and is therefore not worthy of any praise, in my opinion. This may sound like I'm blaming God for what happened, but it really allowed me to look into my beliefs and realize that there is no proof, no reason whatsoever to believe in any deity, and therefore no reason to blame any deity for what happened. It was still a tragedy, what happened to her, but once I came to terms with the fact that there's no God, I was able to let go, because at the end of the day, life begins and life ends. There's no plan. There's no one controlling everything. We have to take our lives into our own hands and cherish every moment with the ones we love. I had an email in from gentleman who wishes to remain anonymous, shared a very personal story. He said this: I am a gay atheist living in Mississippi. I was going to write in for the Angry Atheist podcast and didn't have a chance. But as my tipping point is a similar story, I thought I'd share it. As a child, most of my religious exposure came from my grandparents and wasn't a particularly big deal. The spring break of my 8th grade year, however, all of that changed. I was working with my grandfather, and there happened to be a revival going on at their Baptist church. We worked all day, and then every night we'd go to the revival services. Honestly, I enjoyed it. It was a chance for me to hang out with some people my own age and meet new friends. Throughout the course of the week, the pastor would preach of God's love and sacrifice for our sins. He made sure to mention that every time we sinned, we were ignoring Jesus' love and killing him all over again. As the week wore on, I became convinced that I was destined for hellfire. This feeling was compounded by the fact that I was beginning to develop homosexual urges. Eventually, spring break came to an end, and I returned to my mom's house. As I continued going over that week in my head, I became convinced that I needed to be in church. For the next 2.5 months, I didn't miss a Sunday. That summer, I was invited to go to a church camp called Centrifuge. To this day, I look back at that summer with fondness. I met a ton of people and was able to join those people in a common purpose of worship and praise. It was nothing short of intoxicating. And while I was drunk on Jesus, I said the salvation prayer and became a devoted follower of Christ. And this is where the story turns ugly. For the next 4 years of my life, I became enthralled with church, God, and religion. I read my Bible most days, but always with a study aid to explain God's love and conveniently skip over the bad parts. I continued in church every Sunday and many Wednesdays. I joined religious clubs in school. I joined so many such clubs that I was in a religious meeting of some kind 3 days a week before school and during break. I became an outspoken youth leader in many of these clubs and at church. I even took an overseas mission trip halfway around the world. The whole time I was doing these things, though, I was miserable. I continued to have homosexual feelings and attractions, and that made me evil. I thought that I was sick. I thought that I was possessed. These feelings were Satan attacking me. It was God's test. Being gay was wrong, and I had to fight it, not just avoid action in the real world, but in my own mind as well. If I just prayed more, if I read my Bible more, or if I trusted God more, he would remove these wicked thoughts and feelings from me. I hated myself for having these feelings. I hated myself for being weak. Time and time again, I would fail to keep the thoughts out of my head. Time and time again, I drove the nails deeper into Jesus' hands and the spear deeper into his side. In the summer after graduation, everything changed. My best friend and love interest from high school turned out to be secretly gay as well, and we started dating. I hated myself even more. My homosexuality had moved from my head and into the real world. I was evil. I was betraying God. I was going to hell, and I was bringing him with me. I hated what I was doing to God, but I was happy. All caps. I was happy. My boyfriend made me feel special. He made me feel loved. I finally had somebody that I could talk to. I finally had someone who understood my feelings. I tried to maintain both lives. I was a Christian. I was a believer and follower of Christ, but I was also gay. I was both loved by God and an abomination in his eyes. My tipping point happened in the truck on the way home from church one night. I was praying to God and was overcome with guilt for being gay. Prayer turned to shouting and cursing. Damn it, you made me this way, I shouted audibly. You made me this way knowing I couldn't handle it. Then you gave me someone to love. You did this. This is your fault. I was pissed at God, and I made a conscious decision that if God was going to send me to hell for being what he made me, then it was he and not I that was truly evil. He'd given me someone to love and then told me that loving him was wrong. He was a sadist. He was an ass. I walked away thinking I would spend an eternity in hell. After that day, I stopped going to church and became more and more comfortable in my own skin. I continued into college and finally encountered people with different and no beliefs. My major had me studying a great deal of history, and as I examined all the gods that had come and gone, I realized there was no actual evidence to support the existence of a god at all. I realized I wasn't going to hell because there was no hell to go to. I wasn't mad at God because God didn't exist. I was mad at religion. I was mad that superstition caused me to hate who I was. Today I'm happier than I have ever been. I live a deity-free life with my same boyfriend. I live a deity-free life with my same boyfriend from high school of 6+ years. I'm doing a job that I enjoy. While I'm forced to keep a certain level of secrecy about my life and beliefs because of where I live, I do have a number of friends who know and accept me completely. I am truly happy. My boyfriend and I had the pleasure of meeting you in Memphis at the debate between Matt Dillahunty and he who shall not be named. Boy, the repercussions from that Memphis debate just continue to ripple outward. He says, thank you, Seth, for all that you do. It's great to have someone to remind us that we're not alone and we're not crazy. A powerful email, man. I hear your story and I get livid and I tighten up, and then I hear that you broke free and found your own voice and are living in your own skin, and then I just feel great. It grieves me so often that we, as religious people, used to cheat ourselves out of the diversity and beauty in this world because we wanted everybody to look and act and walk and talk and be just like us. How boring is that? Katie from Poland sent a message and said, I was raised Catholic. As you can imagine, in Poland, there's no other dominating religion. Every single public holiday meant that you supposed to be celebrated in the church. I hated that. I never felt anything in the church, Catholic events, gatherings, and it didn't help me during funerals. You ask about the tipping point. For me, it's just one, and the most important one, freedom. If you live in a country where everything is about the religion, it's very hard to speak your mind, to find books in the library about topics you're interested in, and especially very difficult to walk in the street if you're a metalhead. I was forced to attend religious lessons, not only in primary school, but also in high school. I was pushed by my family against my will to get the third blessing, another name. When I read in the Constitution that my parents have a right to do this till I'm 18, I was angry, very angry. Now I'm 29, for 8 years living in the Czech Republic. I guess you know the religion here is something nobody's concerned about. It's hard when you're a teenager and you try to speak your mind, but everybody around you says, you don't know because you're not an adult yet. You'll come back to God. You'll come back to church if something bad happens to you. Or you're basically in some kind of a Satanistic cult because you wear black. Talk about judging people on appearances, huh? Nobody listens. You're an outcast, a weirdo. I knew a long time ago that I have no faith in me, and it doesn't make me feel bad. People wanted me to feel bad, to feel worse. Sadly, things in Poland don't go very well. Church keeps creating fanatics, making sure that gay people, open-minded people, beautiful individuals will never have a chance to speak up. Lastly, my friend hung himself in 2012. He suffered terribly because of schizophrenia. When his mother went to church to arrange the funeral, she was told that people who commit suicide don't belong to a church cemetery. Looking at her when she said it, It's a bigger tipping point than anything I went through before with this hateful religion. You're doing amazing work, Seth. You talk to so many who sometimes don't see solutions for the situation they are in. Maybe because they don't have enough money to change it, maybe because they hope something will change, or maybe because they are really young. You are a friend to them more than anything else. Thank you. Katie, thank you so much for the encouragement. You know, if I wanted to sum up what this show is, beyond being entertaining and informative, I want this show to be a friend to people. That's a great way to sum up my dream for the Thinking Atheist podcast. You're reminded that you're not alone. You pass some time while you're at home doing whatever. You're driving in the car, you're at the office, you're traveling, staying in the airport, whatever. And you feel like you've got a friend. I'm not talking about just your host, but there's a community of people here who will not judge you, who do get you, who celebrate your diversity. And you keep wearing black, Katie. Okay? I had an email in from Jacob. He said, I was raised in a religious household, but I always had my doubts growing up. I kept fighting them off, but it got harder as the years went on, till I just didn't want to think about it anymore. I was able to sweep my doubts under the rug until a series of events in 2012 picked up those doubts and shoved them straight into my face. It started when a drunk driver pulled out in front of my twin brother, causing a major accident in which my brother and sister-in-law were injured. My brother suffered a badly shattered kneecap and whiplash. My sister-in-law, who I'm very close to, suffered a throat injury and had to be kept under observation to make sure her throat didn't swell shut. At the hospital, my brother-in-laws kept muttering, God is good, because it could have been worse. Every time I heard it, just made me sick. After my brother had his knee operated on, he suffered a post-surgery complication, which put him in the intermediate care unit overnight. During a highly emotional point of the night, everyone started to gather around to pray. I tried very hard to, but I just couldn't do it. I tried to shake it off, but that night stayed with me. I think you summed it up perfectly in your book when you said the annoying ringing of doubt became a clanging fire alarm. Over the next several months, I did everything I could to help them recover, but the fire alarm only got louder as I watched the religious parents from both sides of the family treat my brother like shit. They continually downplayed the severity of his injuries, expecting him to be 100% in no time. A shattered kneecap can take a long time to recover from, and he had to have his neck put in traction to get it realigned. Over the next few months, I found myself in a strange place. When people other than my family would ask if I believed, I'd say no. I could admit my non-belief to other people, but not to myself. That was until I was browsing YouTube one night and came across a video by Penn Jillette. He started the video by mocking Mormonism, which I thought was hilarious. And then the shock came when he turned around and started talking about Christianity in the same tone. This blindsided me. From scanning the comment section of the video, I found my way to his video, The Bible is Bullshit. At that point, I just started hopping from video to video as they appeared in the suggestion box. I wasn't trying to become an atheist. I was just curious about what they had to say. My emotions swirled for the next few weeks as I was slowly coming to terms with what I already knew was true. The final blow came when I came across your Free OK 2011 speech called Blind Spots. It was as if the voice of doubt in my head was giving that speech, because I could identify with so many points being made. When the video ended, I stared into space for a few moments until I found myself just blurting out, I'm an atheist. Jacob, thank you so much for the message. You know, that speech is the first public appearance I ever did back in 2011, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah, I did a speech called Blind Spots. It's on the YouTube channel. And it starts with the story of a guy named Stephen. And there were like 3 different scenarios with Stephen. And we talked about how the religious mold God into whatever they need God to be in that situation. So Stephen's in a gang shooting. In the first scenario, he is uninjured. And they say Stephen should have been killed. God prevented injury. God is so good. And in the second scenario, he's like paralyzed. Stephen should be dead. That bullet should have killed him. God decided he had more work here on planet Earth. He left him here. In Stephen's weakness, God is strong. God is so good. And then if Stephen's killed, well, God called him home. He's now in a place where there is no pain and only bliss. He has a new body, a heavenly body. He's got wings, whatever. No matter what happens, they've got an answer. They've got this silly putty God that they can just mold in whatever shape he needs to be. And that's very telling when you see how I understand coping with crisis. I understand why they do it. God needed another angel in heaven. It's stupid, but I understand it. The idea of not ever seeing your loved ones again, those who were taken from you, I understand. It's very comforting to think that one day there will be a big family reunion. The table will be set, the food will be prepared, the music will be playing, and all of us will join together, and it's going to be amazing again. I understand. Let's do one more before we wrap it up, shall we? Had an email from Christine who said this: I've been listening to your podcast for quite a while. When I read on your website this episode is about events leading to our deconversion, I felt I had to say something. I was raised in a small rural community in northern Manitoba in a devout Mennonite household. I was a sincere Christian, active in my church, youth group, and high school Christian lunch group. I can't pinpoint exactly when my doubts about religion began, but I remember one of my earliest problems with the Bible being its strict limitations on the activities of women in the church. I thought it was rather unfair of God to create so many women with leadership abilities and then prohibit them from teaching in the church. But as a believer at the time, I reminded myself not to argue with absolute truth, so I tried to push the issue aside. I think grade 12 biology class caused me to question some of the things I'd been taught to believe about evolutionary theory from a strictly young Earth creationist point of view. When I decided to enroll in 12th grade biology, my main reason for doing so was to challenge evolution and an attempt to bring my fellow classmates and teacher to Jesus Christ. It didn't work. There was too much evidence on the side of evolution for me to make any rational case against it without appealing to faith. When I started university in 2013, I took a biology class and I learned even more about evolution and gradually became more accepting of the theory as I was exposed to it more and more. I still remained a believer for a while, but I began to wonder what else my particular version of Christianity was wrong about. The psychology course I took in university that same year made me realize that not everything about human behavior is a result of free will or original sin, homosexuality being a good example. As my doubts about Christianity continued, I decided to spend the majority of my summer exploring Christian apologetics, debates between Christians and atheists, and a variety of atheist and scientific material. Let me stop for a second. What a great idea. If you are wanting to approach someone who is in the defense of faith, send them a good debate between a Christian and an atheist, where both sides get equal time, right? You're not sending them an atheist video. You're sending them a debate video with two, quote, experts. It's a great idea. Back to the email. I decided to spend the majority of my summer exploring Christian apologetics, debates between Christians and atheists, and a variety of atheist and scientific material. I became interested in philosophy during this time and soon began to see the fallacies in the arguments I'd always been taught to accept as fact. One discovery that caused a lethal blow to my religious beliefs that I'd previously held so dear was when I learned through several scholarly sources that Judaism, from which Christianity traces its roots, was not the first religion to exist. And the ancient Israelites were in fact polytheists before deciding on Yahweh as their supreme Lord. This caused me to think, does this mean that God sent thousands of people who were never aware of any deity called Yahweh to hell for eternity? I discussed this issue with several of my Christian friends who suggested I talk to their pastors. I began an email correspondence with two pastors from different Christian churches in my area. The answers I received from each of them were well-meaning but unsatisfying. One of them just constantly tried to debate with me, using fallacious arguments. The other was very polite. However, when I asked the second pastor why he was a Christian, his answer was, because it helps me to be a good person. I found this to be a rather weak reason for accepting an entire religion. When I shared some of my struggles with a devout evangelical friend of mine, she suggested that I was spending too much time focusing on God the Father as my subject of concern and should focus on Jesus more. Well, this made little sense to me as I reasoned that if God didn't exist, Jesus couldn't possibly be his son. But I took her advice, began to explore New Testament studies. I listened to lectures on iTunes U from Yale University about New Testament history, and soon came to the conclusion that many of the stories about Jesus recorded in the Gospels were questionable at best. I now identify as an agnostic atheist, but I still haven't found the right way to say this to my parents. They think I'm just denying God, having some sort of faith crisis. I hope that one of these days I'll find the courage to be completely honest with them. Thank you so much, Christine, for the message. 2013. Your whole world must just be a different world over the past 12 months or so, huh? Thanks so much to everybody for sharing their stories. Many more emails than I could possibly get to today. Next Tuesday should be a fascinating look at the Quiverful movement. I encourage you to join us for that broadcast. Today's show been brought to you by Nature Box. Don't forget to go sign up for your free sampler box of great tasting stuff like Italian, bistro, pretzels. Forget the vending machine. You can snack smarter and healthier. Go to naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. And I will see you next week. Take care.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.